Well, I was asked to be part of a panel on SIDS, and one of the issues that we were asked to consider in our discussion was the whole issue of what the global carbon market meant for the Pacific Island countries. As you're aware, there are various global market mechanisms in the world, and so for us in the Pacific region, it hasn't really worked for us. We've been sort of on the outside, as it were, and for a number of reasons. We're small, and so we're a small market. It means that if we have small emissions, that doesn't quite attract the kind of capital flow or finance that will be needed in terms of being involved in the carbon market. So for us, there are huge challenges about us being involved in that. So we have to look at innovative ways, other options that might work for us.
What options are those? What kind of ideas have you been bringing to the table here?
Well, as I said, the Pacific region is probably one of the few regions that has very small emissions globally. That accounts for about 0.03 of the total. So if you're wanting business or the private sector to be involved in that, and they are involved, they'll be interested in volume. We don't produce that type of volume in terms of emissions, so that creates an enormous challenge. So we have to look at other global carbon market mechanisms. REDD+ is an option. There's about 3 REDD+, or maybe, sorry, one or two REDD+ projects in the region. And these are mainly to do with the bigger countries that have forests, like PNG, Solomon Islands, Fiji, Vanuatu. That's one option. The CDM is an option, but it hasn't also worked very well for us. Obviously, because we're small, it's complicated, and there is only about 2 or 3 CDM projects in the region. So when you're talking about a global carbon market, it's fine for the big countries, but for the small island states, it's a challenge. Being small doesn't always quite help, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be innovative. What I think we should be doing is that we should be looking at an approach of where we bundle together all these small projects in the region, so that we have something collective that will have value and mean something. And that's one way, I guess, of.
Yeah, people are often talking about ways in which they can. You hear lots of proposals about how to help small island states either develop better preparations for more extreme weather events, or to sort of work on small scale, I guess, off-grid renewable projects. In your experience in the past couple of years, has the finance been there? I mean, what's blocking the finance? Because as you said, these are small countries, so I imagine, speculating, but we're not talking about billions here.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a very valid question. Being small has its advantages, but it also has its disadvantages. In a lot of our small island states, we don't have the absorptive capacity. So even if you were able to overcome the issue of access to finance, we just don't have the people on the ground to actually, or the institutions, to be able to receive the money and implement. And so this is where regional organizations such as Sprep come in handy, because we were created by these member governments, and so therefore we're seen as an extension to these national governments. So in that regard, regional organizations such as Sprep provide a useful role of complementing and helping to build that capacity at the national level. And that's a critical issue. Human resource capacity is an enormous challenge for us.
Tell me a bit about your organisation's work with the Green Climate Funds. This is the UN's flagship green finance body. It's just really started to get to work, and it looks like it's really taking its time to do anything. But you are one of the accredited entities, which means that money will be channeled rather through you. What kind of projects do you think that you will be sort of seeking to, use these funds for to invest in? What are the governments you're speaking to keen to invest in?
Okay, well, we're obviously working very closely with the governments on this because proposals, projects that have to go to the GCF obviously need to reflect the priorities of the countries. And there are three areas in which we've identified and we're still discussing with countries. We have three proposals. The first area relates to adaptation. I mean, adaptation is still a critical issue for us. You know, here at this Expo, obviously the focus is on mitigation because we're looking at reducing, carbon to enable low carbon economies and to thrive and to grow. But for us, you can't separate adaptation from mitigation. I believe if you mitigate well, you'll adapt well also. And so for us, it's not saying, well, you deal with mitigation here and you deal with adaptation there. And as I said, if you mitigate well, that means you'll have more resources to be able to carry out adaptation.
But is that going to be a challenge in terms of adaptation and in terms of the small island states, developing a coherent package? Is that going to be challenging financially? Because if you just look at sort of one island and say, we're going to plant some mangroves here to build, it's not really big enough, is it, to sort of put forward? So are you looking at a wider package that you're going to push forward?
Absolutely. So while we're talking to the countries, we're proposing a number of approaches. Obviously, there are advantages for working on a national sort of bilateral basis, but I think that it's always better, you go further when you go together. And so we're looking at proposals that will group countries on a sub-regional basis or maybe even a regional basis. So the first project that we're dealing with is adaptation, and we're going to be looking at a subgroup of maybe 6 countries. We're still having that discussion, it hasn't been finalized. The second project is on mitigation, looking at developing renewable energy from biomass, biofuel. And the third one is to do with climate services, helping to strengthen and enhance the capacity of Met services.
Early warning systems.
Well, that's part of the, but it's building their capacity so that they're in a position to be able to not just advise their countries, but to provide, data in advance that will help them make policy decisions in the future. So,
have you been given an idea about how much money, small island developing states can expect from the GCF in this first tranche?
Well, for Sprep, we can develop projects to a value of up to 50 million. So that's the threshold for Sprep. So any country or countries that want to submit joint proposals, the maximum threshold at this point for us is our projects. They're at a threshold of about $50 million.
And just finally, tell me about your, group's coordination ahead of, this big climate summit at the end of the year. You guys are often quoted as being, on the front line of climate change, the ones who are sort of feeling the effects. You bring a lot of that kind of reality, that emotion to the talks, but politically, I guess you're a small group. So how are you coordinating? I mean, we've seen the Marshall Islands being out quite vocal about shipping emissions and the like, but give us a sense about how you're working together.
Yeah, well, as I said, if we go together, we go further. And that's always been our strength. We're small, but when we come together, we're stronger. Marshall Islands is the chair of the Sprep meeting this year, so they've been given a sort of an ambassadorial role to articulate the views of Sprep member countries in that context. But we've always had a program, in addition to a number of assistance that we've given to countries where we help train and build a capacity in terms of negotiation. So we have a number of training activities that are coming up. We have a workshop planned for the North Pacific in July, where we're not just helping to update and brief countries, but we're actually doing training, practical hands-on training for negotiators for COP21 in Paris. And then we have sessions for Pacific Island countries for Pacific Island leaders during their annual summit in September of this year, which is scheduled to be held in Papua New Guinea. We will have maybe an hour or two with them just to brief and update on what the key issues are. And then we also have a separate session for ministers and officials who will be attending COP21. So, and this support has been ongoing every year, where we bring together member countries. We make sure that we try to help them to speak with one voice, and we help to do that by providing them with, effective policy advice on what the key issues are. So that's something that we've been doing for the past 20 plus years. We've been involved in climate change for more than 20 years, and so we continue to do that. And so COP21 is no exception. For us, we have no other choice. It has to be a successful COP with an outcome where we can have a legally binding agreement. For us, that's important. We've got to have a legally binding agreement in Paris come November, December this year.
You also need some deal on loss and damage, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a key issue for us in the region. So we're happy that there is that reference or inclusion of loss and damage in the discussions, and so that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on. And we're doing a study at the moment where we're hoping to provide more information on that to the members prior to heading off to COP21. So we're putting our hand up and we're saying to the members, we're here as we've always been in the past to help them, whether it be loss and damage, whether it be mitigation, adaptation, whatever it might be. These are the areas that we've helped our member countries in the past. We'll continue to do that come COP21 in Paris.